Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
It's amazing when you talk to people and you learn their journey and how they got to where they are and how they continue from that point forward. We're going to talk with an author who's got 3 fantastic books out. You can find them on Amazon, and he's not stopping. He's been on this journey for quite some time now. If he wants to give his age, I think he should, because it's just amazing that this man is doing what he's doing. Chuck Waldron joins us on the program. Hey, Chuck, how you doing?
I'm doing great. This is just a treat to talk with you about my writing and share it with the viewers. Yeah.
I've learned so much in the last few podcasts, even going into depth of your books. And I'm not an avid reader. I'm going to say that right now. You've sucked me back into reading. Seriously.
That's a good thing. Yes.
Yes. Just by the process and the subjects of your book. One of them focuses around Ernest Hemingway. And you got me Googling him, learning about his life. I don't know what happened. I find it, when you've got a great book and a great author, that's what happens. You've said it before, I do believe. How old are you?
Oh, I'm next month I'll turn 87.
Amazing. Yeah. And you're just churning right along. Let's talk about your writing journey. What were you doing years ago? And then how did you get into writing?
I think the writing was a culmination of always liking to tell stories. Maybe talking too much at parties, but there you go. That's the problem with writers, is that we have too many stories that we want to tell, and not enough time to tell them. But let's get back to the timeline on writing. I was a psychiatric social worker, and in 1986, I was involved in some of the high-profile child abuse, child endangerment issues, families that were doing horrible things to each other. And I just got to the point where I needed a break. And a couple of things happened. Just about the time I thought I needed a break, my heart said, "Oh, yes, you do." And as a result of that, I had a heart attack and then a bypass. I was still in my 50s, and so that struck me as kind of a wake-up call. As I started coming out of that, and my wife noticed a story in the paper. We were living in Sarasota at the time. And there was a woman, Henrietta Blake, who was teaching a class in short stories. What a great opportunity. Got enrolled, went down, and as it turned out, Henrietta was a retired copy editor from New Yorker magazine, and really knew how to write a good short story and how to edit and get it in print. And so I wrote my first short story. It was called Tears in the Dust. Fast forward to retiring, and in my spare time between then and retirement, I had written probably over 50 short stories.
Wow.
Maybe 10 of them were good. 10 of them were awful. Then the rest were in the middle. But I retired, and suddenly I had time to write. I took my very first short story, Tears in the Dust, and my first novel called Tears in the Dust, with the story that I had written halfway in the middle of the story. So I was able to go back into the backstory and then take the story forward. You mentioned 3 novels. Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 novels now, because after Tears in the Dust, I thought, well, I've written a novel. What am I going to do now? And then about that time, living in Ontario, November came along, and November has something called RIMO, write a novel in a month, and it's a challenge to write a novel in the month of November, and you have to meet a $55,000 or word challenge. So I got in a group with some students at the local universities, and we sat down and started writing, and it was really fun because they when I was in university, I could knock off 3,000 words a day, no problem. Well, writing a novel takes a little bit more discipline than that. And I had all the discipline in the world going for me. I'd finished my 55,000 words in 13 days. The result was Remington and the Mysterious Fedora. I met the challenge, but it didn't end there because I had to really rewrite before I could even think about publishing it because it was a very rough draft in 13 days. Finished with that. I'm going to stop? Not yet. Came up with the idea of writing a novel about, I wanted a car chase, good guys chasing bad guys. And so I came up with the idea of Serve Cold, where a young man learns that the man that he thought was his father wasn't. And he was really going to search for his parents that had been involved in a very um, uh, a long-standing feud with another family. So his parents had been wiped out. Who was he really? He wanted to go back and find that out. But immediately the bad guys get involved, and of course, I think I wrote 3 car chases just so I could do that. Trying to capture the image. I don't know how many people remember Steve McQueen's the car chase scene in San Francisco, and trying to replicate that in my words. Then along came the idea of the executioner's mandate, and that's when I first started playing around with a dystopian look at what I would call a fractured America, and I could place it in 10, 15 years from now. What would happen if the if things that are happening now suddenly took place, and so had some fun with that. Then I wrote 2 books: the Clean Sweep Conspiracy and Clean Sweep Counterstrike, where I had two stories where my characters could deal with, and when I say conspiracy, I'm not talking about the aliens with the aluminum hats and that sort of thing, but enough to be able to build some real drama and excitement into the stories. I finished that, and then I went on kind of a writing vacation for a couple of years. Then I thought about Tears in the Dust, and it had some elements in it that I wanted to pick up on again. And then that's when I came up with The Assassination of E. Hemingway, where my character could start out. He was a Russian. He became a communist during the revolution in 1917, and carry that story, pick up some of Tears in the Dust and his time in Spain. But as you and I talked about, he ends up in Cuba and then eventually is ordered to assassinate E. Hemingway. How that actually comes out, then the reader really needs to buy the book, which they can on Amazon. And excuse me, that was really fun to write, but it also appealed to me because there is so much misunderstanding about Cuba, the revolution, and our country's response to it, that I wanted to kind of dig at some of that. Then the last book was Countdown to Doomsday, and you and I talked about that, which again picks up on that dystopic idea of climate change, food shortage, famine, all that sort of thing like that, and imagine how the world might be if we didn't pay attention to climate change, if we didn't pay attention to food production, if we didn't pay attention to all these things that are happening. There's a breakdown in society, and the characters, he and his wife, have to go on the run, and they make a trek from White City, Florida, to the top of the world, and it was just so much fun to write, and that I still consider that, I think, my uh, better novel. Tears in the Dust, the first novel, and Countdown to Doomsday, I put right as a tie.
Hmm.
Then something happened. I was asked to do a nonfiction story, and last week you and I talked about the reporter that was killed in the line of duty in Orlando. That kind of broke me out of the fiction writing and into nonfiction. And I never expected that this would happen, although I have always thought about writing something that deals with things that are happening in our world today, and how can I make a stand for that. So I came up with something, and you and I talked before we went on air. I decided I would call it a polemic. I read about what a polemic is, a kind of a combative argument that stands up against truth to power. Is what happens in a polemic. I'm not sure, but it was fun to look that up. So I started a eulogy for a broken America. That's what is the title, and the subtitle is On the Road to Fascism, but there's a question mark. And that has allowed me to really look at, I know I'm going on, but I also know you'd ask questions if you wanted to stop me. The research that I've been doing is that the seeds for a broken America, I think, were planted over 400 years ago.
How do you define
And
broken America?
incivility. Um, there's something called moral panic. It's an odd combination of words. So I started reading about it.
Hmm.
Moral panic is that repetition of a drumbeat frightening people, and they become so frightened that they start to divide them or pull themselves away from the other side. They no longer listen. One person described the Salem witch hunts as a result of moral panic, where people became convinced that there were witches, and then became convinced that they had to kill the witches. Well, we all know that that was a large mistake. The other part of that is something called system collapse, where when you were asking me to define, but the system collapse is based on the idea that there have been there's always been a time limit on civilizations. So what would happen if we're on the verge of a system collapse? We have a moral panic, which is convincing a large number of people that up is down, left is right, and the various other things that George Orwell warned about in 1984. Then that 400 years uh, uh, of panic resulting in what is now, for I call forbidden fruit. But it's that maybe poisonous fruit is better than forbidden. If you look at something like the list of massacres that have occurred in the United States, if you look at the history of genocide, what we've done to the indigenous people of this country. Yeah, the indigenous people on Plymouth Rock welcomed the people ashore, and then didn't know that the result of that is that they were going to be pushed into history's dustbin. Then I started looking at something related to genocide, and that would be lynching. The history of lynching, and that sort of tied in because I'm working on my memoir. I researched the number of lynchings that happened in 1937, the year I was born. And I was flabbergasted to realize
Wow.
how many people were lynched in 1937. I think of something like that as sort of a Southern historical event. I really know better, but still. Then I pulled up a list of people that were killed in labor disputes. Now you put that together, and that comes back to the question you asked: is a broken America? We've been broken through a lot of these things that have happened, and now we're at the point where we need to. Or I've reached a point where I don't want to use the word MAGA, but it touches on that. People that want to believe have to hold on to their belief as if it was a lifesaver, a personal flotation device. And how are you going to convince somebody to let go of that safety and then swim off with you because you got a better argument? And so that I guess maybe what I'm trying to do, and then I'm going to take a long breath here, is figure out how I take all of those things, which I consider pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, and then put them together in what's known as a polemic. It's just a way to make my statement.
Well, now I got a clearer picture of what that is. But I wonder, you mentioned before, even with the short stories, you had 50, maybe 10 were good. How do you judge what's good? You wrote it. How do you get feedback from others? What do you base the is good on?
I know when I look at something I've written, I know that that's what I wanted to say. I also read everything aloud into I have a recording device, and then I'll listen to it. Where did I stumble when I was reading? Where did I have the right character voice? And I know that's good, but I don't know necessarily what's bad. The way you find that out, Steve, is by letting other people read it and comment back. Because they'll I was mentioning Hemingway. My very first story was Tears in the Dust, and I was at a writing conference at the University of Iowa one summer. I used that as my story to workshop, and the instructor said, "Oh, that was very Hemingway-esque," and then he told me that wasn't a compliment. And so over the years, I've developed a very kind of not a thick skin, not a thin skin, but one that will allow comments to come in so that I can look at it and view it as trying to make the story better. But once it's in print, it's in print.
Right. Do you feel your background working with people on a psychological level has enabled you to be a deeper writer, have insight that maybe other writers might not have, because of your background?
I think that's yes. The short answer is yes. Slightly longer answer is that I think writers are always looking inside for stories. I mean, it's almost impossible to exclude our life experiences, exclude how we feel about things from our writing. I mean, that's just human nature, I think. But having worked with broken families, broken people over the years that I did that, is a reminder that we all have things in our life that are difficult, but that there's hope. It would have been a horrible choice to be a social worker for as long as I was and not believe in the good of people to change. Now, did everybody I meet change? No. I'm not that naive, but yeah, it's using those to create characters that I think have some reason for what they do. A professor once said that all human behavior has a reason. The problem is just figuring out what that reason is. And I maybe a good example, I don't know where we are on time, but a good example would be going back to Tears in the Dust, the first novel, not the short story. I had a villain in the story. And throughout the story, he was horrible. I don't know how I ever wrote a character that was as evil as he was. He hurt and killed and tortured women over the years in the story, and I needed a background for that. So I went back to when he was born and living in a small cabin in rural, wherever it was. And his father, he would listen to his father beating his mother and doing all awful things to her. That was his video of what a man should be. So he just carried that forward. And I drew that from my own understanding of human behavior, how we learn the good and the bad and the ugly.
That being said, and we're talking, about villains in books, do you feel, and this is not about you, the author, just curious, but based on your background,
Yeah.
do you feel that many who do wrong, commit crimes, etc., those who are maybe incarcerated right now, do you feel that many of them went down that road because of their upbringing? And it's just the example that you're giving with this villain, where that's what he knew because that's what his parents did. And that was kind of the springboard. I'm not condoning anything here. I'm just saying, surface value. What are your thoughts?
Well, that calls into question nature versus nurture. We all have something inherent in us that's unique because that's the way we are. But we're also part of an environment that we grow up in.
Right.
I grew up in a family where my father and mother never lifted a hand to spank but my father and mother had a way of talking that when my mother said Charles a certain way, I knew that was as much as getting hit with a stick.
Same with my mother, and if she touched the belt, which never came out. But it was like, like some Italian families have the spoon up there, it's like, see that up there?
Yeah.
I just looked at the time. We're out of time, and I want to reserve a moment here to tell everybody how they can find you if they want to learn about your books, find out about you. Is it best thing go to your website?
I welcome people to my website at chuckwaldron.com. And also my email address is chuck@chuckwaldron.com. And as I mentioned earlier, I have a free PDF on how to become a proud indie author. That all somebody has to do is send me an email with that in the subject line, and I'll send them a free PDF.
Wow. Wonderful talking with you, Chuck, during these podcasts. Just the insight, your foresight, even just moving the curtain back and looking behind the scenes of what it's like to write and where the inspiration comes from, I find fascinating. Again, you've sucked me back into reading. You really have.
Okay.
And I appreciate it. And thank you so much for being with us.
Steve, it has been a treasure. Thank you for talking to me.
Thank you. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.